Martha Hale woke before dawn, as she always did. The small apartment above the hardware store felt cold in the early November air, but she didn't mind. She pulled on her worn cardigan, the one with patches at the elbows, and tied her silver hair back with a simple ribbon. At 78 years old, Martha moved slower than she used to, but her spirit remained steady and strong. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the town of Pinewood wake up. This had been her home for 53 years. She'd raised her son here alone after her husband died in a factory accident when Jack was only 7. Those were hard years, years of working double shifts at the diner, mending clothes by candlelight, and praying her boy would grow up kind and strong. Jack was a Navy SEAL now, stationed somewhere she couldn't pronounce, doing work she couldn't fully understand. She hadn't seen him in 11 months. Every night she prayed for his safety. This morning, Martha planned to treat herself to breakfast at Rosie's Diner, the same place where she'd worked for 27 years before retiring. She walked the 3 blocks slowly, her cane tapping against the sidewalk. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her shoes. Inside Rosie's, the smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around her like an old friend. The booths were full of familiar faces, folks she'd known for decades. She smiled and waved, making her way to her favorite spot by the window. But then she saw him, Travis Boyd. The man sat sprawled across 2 seats, his thick arms draped over the booth, his greasy hair slicked back. He was laughing too loud, making crude jokes that made the waitress, a young girl named Emma, visibly uncomfortable. Martha had heard the stories. Travis was a bully, plain and simple. He terrorized this town with threats and violence, and no one dared stand against him. He'd beaten his own brother so badly the man left town. He destroyed a teacher's car because she gave his nephew detention. The police did nothing. Fear had become a second language in Pinewood. Martha tried to walk past him quietly, but her cane accidentally brushed against his boot. Everything changed in that moment. Part 2. The strike. Travis turned his head slowly, his eyes cold and mean. "Watch where you're going, old woman." Martha stopped, her heart quickening. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." "Didn't mean to?" He stood up, towering over her. The diner went silent. Every fork stopped moving. Every conversation died. "You people never mean to do nothing, but you always end up in my way." Martha took a small step back. "Please, I was just trying to get to my seat." "Your seat?" Travis laughed, bitter and sharp. "Everything in this town belongs to me if I say it does. You got a problem with that?" Around them, customers stared at their plates. The manager, Nina, a petite woman with kind eyes, stood frozen behind the counter, her hands trembling. Emma, the waitress, backed into the kitchen, tears already forming. Martha lifted her chin slightly. "I don't want any trouble, young man. I just came for breakfast." "Young man," Travis's face twisted. "You disrespecting me?" "No, sir, I would never." "Liar." He stepped closer, invading her space, using his size like a weapon. "You old folks think you're special. Think you deserve respect just 'cause you've been breathing longer than everybody else. But respect is earned, and you just lost all of yours." Martha's hands shook on her cane. She could feel her blood pressure rising, her chest tightening. "Please, I'll just leave." Too late for that. What happened next seemed to unfold in horrible slow motion. Travis raised his hand, his face contorted with rage and something darker, pleasure. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed the fear in her eyes, the gasps from the crowd, the power he wielded over every trembling soul in that room. His palm connected with her face with a crack that echoed like thunder. The force sent Martha spinning. Her cane clattered to the floor. Her glasses flew off her face and skittered under a booth. She crumpled onto the cold tile, her cheek already swelling, her vision blurred with shock and pain. The diner remained frozen. Not one person moved. Not one person spoke. Travis stood over her, grinning like a king surveying his conquered territory. "That's what happens when you don't show respect." Martha lay there, her body aching, her dignity shattered, wondering if anyone would help her up. Part 3. The door opens. Martha pressed her palm against the cold tile floor, trying to push herself up. Her cheek throbbed with a pain that radiated down her jaw. She tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him, not in front of everyone. "Stay down," Travis said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You look better that way." Around the diner, people stared with wide eyes and pale faces. An elderly couple in the corner booth clutched each other's hands. A construction worker halfway through his pancakes sat paralyzed, his fork suspended in midair. Nina stood behind the counter, her mouth open but no words coming out. This was Pinewood. This was what fear had turned them into, silent witnesses to cruelty, too terrified to be heroes. Martha finally managed to prop herself up on one elbow. Her vision swam, and she had to blink several times to clear it. Her cheek felt like it was on fire. She'd never been struck before, not once in all her 78 years. The shock of it was almost worse than the pain. "Need some help, Grandma?" Travis mocked, extending his hand in a grotesque parody of kindness. When she didn't take it, he laughed. "Didn't think so." That's when the door chimed. The sound cut through the thick silence like a bell in a cathedral. Every head turned toward the entrance. A man stepped inside, tall and lean, wearing a simple gray hoodie, faded jeans, and dusty boots. His face was weathered but young, maybe mid-30s, with deep brown skin and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Beside him walked a dog, a magnificent Belgian Malinois with a black and tan coat, moving with the silent precision of a trained warrior. The man stopped just inside the doorway. His dog stopped with him, ears pricked forward, body tense and alert. Martha's heart nearly stopped. She knew that walk. She knew those eyes. She knew that face because she'd kissed it every night before bed when he was small. Because she'd watched it grow from boy to man. Because she'd memorized every feature during those long months when he was deployed, and all she had were photographs and prayers. "Jack," she whispered. Her son didn't hear her. He was already moving, his gaze locked on something across the room. The dog, Titan, she remembered him saying in his letters, matched his pace perfectly, both of them advancing with a controlled intensity that made the air feel electric. Jack's eyes found her on the floor. She saw his expression change, saw something dark and dangerous flash across his face before he locked it down into perfect, terrifying calm. "Mom." Part 4. The confrontation, the word hung in the air like a verdict. Jack's voice was quiet, almost gentle, but underneath it ran a current of barely contained fury that made several customers lean back in their booths. Travis turned slowly, his grin still plastered across his face. Well, looks like the old bat's got backup." Titan released a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It was a sound that didn't belong in a small-town diner. It belonged in combat zones, in places where survival depended on reading threats correctly. Jack knelt beside his mother, his movements deliberate and controlled. He touched her shoulder with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the coiled tension in his body. "Did he hit you?" Martha tried to shake her head, tried to downplay what had happened, but the tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "Jack, please don't do anything foolish." "Foolish?" Travis barked out a laugh. "Yeah, listen to her, soldier boy. Sit down like everyone else before you find yourself on the floor too." Jack stood slowly. He wasn't enormous, maybe 6 feet tall, maybe 180 pounds, but something about him commanded space. It was in the way he held himself, perfectly balanced, perfectly still, like a weapon waiting to be deployed. Titan positioned himself at Jack's right leg, every muscle coiled and ready. His eyes never left Travis. "Titan," Jack said quietly. The dog sat immediately, but his gaze remained locked on the bully like crosshairs on a target. Jack took one step forward. "You're going to apologize to my mother." The diner was so silent that people could hear their own heartbeats. Travis puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim the intimidation factor that had always worked before. "Apologize to her. She bumped into me. I was teaching her respect." "You teach fear," Jack replied, his voice level and cold. "There's a difference. You must be the Navy son she keeps bragging about." Travis stepped closer, invading Jack's space the way he'd invaded Martha's. "What are you gonna do? Lecture me about honor and duty?" He jabbed his finger into Jack's chest. "This is my town, boy. I do what I want." The diner collectively gasped. Jack didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't react at all. But Titan rose to his feet again, the hair along his spine standing up like dark razors. The growl that emerged from his throat was deeper now, more primal, the kind of sound that awakened ancient survival instincts. Jack spoke quietly, his words measured and final. "I'm giving you one chance. Walk away." Travis smirked, drunk on his own perceived power. "Nah, I think I'll make you join her on the floor." He raised his fist. Part 5. The Reckoning. Jack's hand moved with surgical precision. One moment Travis's fist was swinging toward his face, and the next, Jack had caught the man's wrist midair, his grip iron-tight and unbreakable. The shock on Travis's face was almost comical. With one fluid twist, Jack forced the bully down to his knees. The movement was so fast, so efficient, that most people didn't fully register what had happened until Travis was already on the ground, his face contorted in pain. "Let go of me," Travis howled, trying to pull away. Jack's expression didn't change. "That's up to Titan." The Belgian Malinois stepped forward, his teeth bared in a display that made several customers stand up from their booths. The growl that rumbled from his chest felt like it vibrated through the walls themselves, primal and utterly terrifying. Travis froze completely. All the bluster, all the bravado, all the cruel confidence that had defined him for years, it evaporated in an instant. He was face to face with something he'd never encountered before. Real, trained, controlled lethality. Jack leaned closer, his voice quiet enough that only Travis could hear the first part. "You struck an elderly woman. You threw your weight around because you thought no one stronger than your ego would ever challenge you." He tightened his grip slightly and Travis whimpered. "But you forgot something." Jack's next words were louder, intentional, meant for every trembling soul in that diner. "There's always someone better trained, more controlled, and far less afraid than you." Titan's growl deepened. Travis's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Jack continued, his voice carrying through the room like a sermon. "Fear keeps people silent, but courage wakes up the entire room." And just like that, something shifted. Nina, the manager, stepped out from behind the counter. Her voice shook, but she spoke anyway. "He's been terrorizing us for years. No one stops him. We tried reporting him to the police, but he threatened anyone who testified. He threatened my daughter. He said he'd burn down my house." "Shut up," Travis hissed, trying to sound menacing, but his voice cracked with fear. "Titan," Jack commanded. The dog lunged forward, not to attack, but close enough that Travis could feel the heat of his breath, could see every sharp tooth, could understand exactly what kind of force he was up against. Travis collapsed backward with a yelp, scrambling against the floor. Jack didn't smile, didn't gloat, he simply stated a fact. "You will not threaten anyone again." Around the diner, people began to stand. The construction worker, the elderly couple, Emma the waitress emerged from the kitchen. One by one, they found their voices. "He destroyed my truck because I wouldn't give him free repairs. He broke my son's arm. He threatened to kill my dog." The testimonies poured out like water through a broken dam, years of suppressed fear and injustice finally finding release. Part 6. The truth emerges. Martha pulled herself up using the edge of a booth, her legs unsteady but her spirit rekindled by something she hadn't felt in this town for a long time: hope. She watched her son, this man she'd raised on minimum wage and maximum love, stand like a pillar of strength in the center of chaos. "Jack," she said softly, "that's enough." He looked at her, really looked at her. And in that moment, Martha saw the little boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd promised her on his father's grave that he'd make her proud. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. This was about respect. About the woman who'd sacrificed everything, her youth, her dreams, her own comfort, so he could have a chance at a better life. The woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion so he could go to college, who'd supported his decision to serve even though it terrified her, who'd sent him care packages and prayers every single week he'd been deployed. Jack released Travis's wrist and stepped back. "Get out." Travis stumbled to his feet, cradling his twisted wrist against his chest. His face was blotchy with fear and humiliation. "And the next time you even think about raising your hand to anyone," Jack continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "remember this moment. Remember how small you felt. Remember that courage isn't measured by who you can hurt, but by who you choose to protect." Travis staggered toward the door, his swagger completely gone. He looked like what he truly was, a coward who'd hidden behind intimidation because he'd never faced real consequences. As he reached for the door handle, he turned back one last time, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "This isn't over," Titan growled. Travis fled. The door swung shut behind him, and for several seconds the diner remained completely silent. Then, from the back corner, a teenage boy wearing a baseball cap stood up. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you." And then the entire room erupted. Applause thundered through the small space. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years embraced. Emma, the waitress, was crying. Nina came around the counter and hugged Martha, both women sobbing with relief. An elderly man with tears streaming down his weathered face approached Jack. "You reminded us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You reminded us that we don't have to let fear run our lives." Jack nodded, resting his hand on Titan's head. "Courage doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you act anyway." People lined up to shake his hand, to pet Titan, to tell their stories of what Travis had done to them or their families. Each testimony was another brick removed from the wall of silence that had imprisoned this town. Martha watched it all with quiet tears rolling down her swollen cheek, understanding that something fundamental had changed in Pinewood today. Part 7. A community reborn. Jack guided his mother to a booth by the window, the same spot where she'd hoped to enjoy a peaceful breakfast an hour ago. Titan lay down beside the table, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes remained alert, always watching, always ready. Nina brought over 2 cups of coffee without being asked, her hand steadier now. "Breakfast is on the house today, for both of you." She looked at Jack with something like wonder. "I've been running this diner for 16 years, and I've never seen anyone stand up to Travis like that." "You could have," Jack said gently. "You all could have, together." Nina nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "We were so afraid. Alone, each of us felt powerless, but together you're stronger than any bully," Jack finished. As Nina walked away, Martha reached across the table and took her son's hand. Her fingers, gnarled with arthritis and marked by decades of hard work, wrapped around his calloused palm. "Your father would be so proud of you," she whispered. Jack felt his throat tighten. His father, David Hale, had been a good man, a gentle man who'd worked himself to death trying to provide for his family. Jack had been too young when he passed, but he carried his father's memory like a compass, always trying to honor the man he barely got to know. "I hope so, Mom, I really do." Martha squeezed his hand. "You didn't just defend me today, you gave this whole town their courage back." Around them, the atmosphere had completely transformed. People were talking, laughing, sharing stories. The weight that had pressed down on Pinewood for so long was finally lifting. The construction worker approached their table, hat in hand. "Ma'am, I want to apologize. I should have helped you when you were on the floor, we all should have." Martha smiled at him, her swollen cheek making it lopsided but genuine. "You're helping now, that's what matters." Throughout the morning, more people stopped by. Some brought flowers they'd picked from their yards. Others brought baked goods. Emma brought Martha an ice pack wrapped in a clean towel for her face. But the most profound moment came when a woman in her 40s, someone Martha didn't recognize, sat down at their table with tears streaming down her face. "My name is Rebecca Torres," she said. "Travis put my husband in the hospital 3 years ago. Carlos tried to intervene when Travis was harassing a young girl at the gas station. The beating was so severe that Carlos still has headaches. We filed a police report, but Travis's cousin works at the station and nothing happened. She looked at Jack with desperate hope. Will you testify? Will you tell them what you saw today? Because if you do, if someone with your credentials speaks up, maybe they'll finally listen. Jack didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely. Part 8. Aftermath and New Beginnings. 3 weeks later, Jack sat in the Pinewood County Courthouse, still in his civilian clothes but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. Beside him sat Martha, her face fully healed now, wearing her best Sunday dress. The courtroom was packed. Nina was there. Emma, the construction worker. Rebecca and Carlos Torres, the elderly couple from the diner. Nearly 40 people had come forward with testimonies about Travis Boyd's years of terror. Travis sat at the defendant's table, his wrist in a brace, his face sullen and defeated. His lawyer had tried to dismiss the charges, claiming self-defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. When Jack took the stand, he spoke clearly and calmly, describing exactly what he'd witnessed. He didn't embellish, didn't need to. The truth was damning enough. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened to every word. When the testimonies concluded, she removed her glasses and looked directly at Travis. Mr. Boyd, you have terrorized this community for far too long. Your pattern of violence and intimidation ends today. Travis received 18 months in county jail, 5 years of probation, mandatory anger management, and a restraining order preventing him from contacting any of his victims. When the gavel fell, Martha heard something she hadn't heard in years: people in Pinewood cheering inside a courthouse. Outside, under the pale winter sun, the community gathered on the courthouse steps. Nina announced that she was starting a neighborhood watch program. Carlos said he'd teach self-defense classes at the community center. Emma shared that she'd enrolled in criminal justice courses at the local college. Jack watched it all with quiet satisfaction. He'd be returning to his unit in 2 days, but he knew he was leaving Pinewood in better shape than he'd found it. That evening, Martha cooked dinner in her small apartment: fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread, Jack's favorites. Titan lay by the door, having earned a special treat of chicken scraps. As they ate, Martha studied her son's face. You gave me my dignity back that day, she said. But more than that, you reminded everyone what courage looks like. Jack set down his fork. Mom, I learned courage from you. You worked 2 jobs to keep me fed. You never complained, never gave up, never let me see you break even when I know you were breaking inside. You taught me that real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up. Martha's eyes filled with tears. I just did what any mother would do. No, Jack said firmly. You did what an extraordinary mother would do. And everything I am, every life I've saved, every mission I've completed, it all started with the foundation you built for me. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of peace that only comes from deep, unconditional love. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a medal, bronze and worn. Dad's purple heart. I've carried it through every deployment. I want you to have it back. Martha shook her head, pushing it gently toward him. Your father would want you to keep it. He'd want you to know that you've honored his memory every single day. 2 days later, Martha stood at the bus station, watching Jack prepare to leave. Titan sat obediently beside him, tail wagging slowly. Stay safe, Martha whispered, hugging her son tightly. Come home to me. Always, Mom, always. As the bus pulled away, Martha stood on the sidewalk, waving until she couldn't see him anymore. But she didn't feel alone. Around her, neighbors waved too. Nina came and stood beside her. Emma brought her coffee. Pinewood was different now. The shadow had lifted. People walked taller, spoke louder, helped each other more. And Martha Hale, the humble 78-year-old widow who'd been struck down in a diner, stood as a symbol of something beautiful. That courage can be quiet, that strength can be gentle, and that sometimes love is the most powerful force of all. The town would never forget what happened that November morning, and neither would she. Because on that day, her son reminded everyone that fear only wins when good people stay silent, and that one act of courage can wake up an entire community.